I thought I knew the trail like the back of my hand. The day had started perfectly. The sky was clear in a way that almost seemed artificial, and the air carried a dry warmth that made everything feel calm and predictable. My girlfriend, Peyton, had suggested the hike, which stood out to me because she was not usually the one to initiate plans like that. She seemed quieter than usual, but not in a concerning way. It felt more like she needed a break, the kind of reset that only being out in nature could provide. I did not question it. If anything, I thought it would be good for both of us. We had both been dealing with stress, even if we had not talked about it directly. Work had been wearing her down in ways I had only partially noticed, and I had been too caught up in my own responsibilities to fully understand what she was going through. The hike seemed simple enough. It was supposed to be a loop trail, moderately challenging but nothing dangerous or remote. I had even been there once before, years earlier, and that memory gave me a level of confidence that I did not bother to question. When we arrived at the trailhead, the area was unusually quiet. There was only one other car in the lot, parked at an angle that caught my attention for a brief moment. It looked slightly out of place, but I did not dwell on it. The only sound came from the wind moving gently through the trees. Peyton stood still for a moment after we got out of the car, her gaze fixed on the tree line, as if she were trying to focus on something just beyond it. When I asked if she was ready, she nodded, but she did not smile. The first part of the hike went exactly as expected. The trail was clearly marked, and the ground was firm and easy to walk on. Wooden posts appeared at regular intervals, confirming we were on the right path. We walked side by side without much conversation, letting the quiet of the forest settle around us. It felt peaceful, the kind of silence that is comforting when you believe you are still in control of your surroundings. We came across a fork in the trail that I did not remember from before. It was not dramatic or overgrown, and there were no warning signs. One path curved gently to the left, while the other continued straight ahead. Both looked equally used, equally plausible. I paused for a moment, trying to recall which way the trail went, but my memory failed me. Peyton noticed my hesitation and asked which direction we should take. I told her that I thought the trail continued straight. The truth was that I was not completely certain, but I spoke with enough confidence that neither of us questioned it further. That decision felt minor at the time, but it was the moment everything began to unravel. The path we chose did not seem wrong at first. It was slightly narrower, and the trees grew closer together, their branches forming a loose canopy overhead that filtered the sunlight into uneven patterns. The air felt cooler, but nothing about it felt immediately alarming. We continued walking, trusting that the trail would reconnect with the main loop ahead. Time passed more quickly than I realized. 30 minutes turned into an hour, and then longer, without any sign of familiar landmarks or trail markers. The wooden posts that had guided us earlier were gone. I told myself that this was normal, and that not every section of the trail needed markers, especially if the path was obvious. But the path was becoming less obvious. The ground grew more uneven, with exposed roots twisting across the surface and forcing us to watch every step. The silence deepened in a way that felt unnatural. The distant sounds that usually fill a forest, like birds or insects, had faded until they were completely gone. All that remained was the sound of our own movement. Peyton was the first to stop. She turned slowly, looking back at the path behind us, then forward again. There was a tension in her expression that had not been there before. She did not panic, but she was clearly uneasy. I told her we were fine, that the loop would likely reconnect ahead if we just kept going. I said it confidently, even though I was no longer sure. Eventually, Peyton asked how long we had been walking. I checked my phone, expecting a quick answer, but instead, I noticed something else first. There was no signal. That alone was not unusual, but when I looked at the time, a deeper concern began to take hold. We had been out much longer than I thought. Long enough that we should have completed the loop, or at least reached something recognizable. That was when I suggested we turn back. Peyton agreed immediately, without hesitation. Her quick agreement should have reassured me, but it did not. Instead, it made everything feel more serious. Turning back should have solved the problem. It should have led us directly to the trailhead. But when we started retracing our steps, something felt wrong almost immediately. The path did not look the same. I know how that sounds, and I understand how easily it could be explained as confusion or stress, but I remember it clearly. The roots seemed to be in different places. The slope of the ground felt different under my feet. Even the spacing between the trees felt off, as if the entire landscape had shifted slightly while we were not paying attention. Peyton noticed it too. She did not say anything, but I could see it in the way she moved, more cautiously now, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. We began walking faster, both of us trying to ignore the growing unease. That was when we heard it. At first, the sound was so faint that I almost dismissed it. It came from behind us, something moving through the brush. It was not loud enough to clearly identify, but it was consistent enough to feel deliberate. I stopped walking, and the sound stopped as well. Peyton looked at me, her expression questioning but tense. I told her it was probably an animal, something small moving through the undergrowth. I said it in a calm tone, but even as I spoke, I felt a growing sense that it was not that simple. We started moving again, and the sound returned. This time, it was closer. It followed the same pattern. Whenever we slowed, it slowed. Whenever we stopped, it stopped. The sun began to lower in the sky, and the light shifted into something softer and more fragile. Shadows stretched longer across the ground, and the spaces between the trees seemed darker than they should have been. By the time the sun dropped to the edge of the trees, I could no longer convince myself that we would find our way back before nightfall. The realization settled over me slowly, like a weight pressing down on my chest. It changed the way I thought, the way I moved, and the way I looked at everything around us. The forest no longer felt quiet in a peaceful way. Instead, it felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath. Peyton moved closer to me without saying anything. The distance between us disappeared as we walked, both of us instinctively seeking some form of reassurance. Every sound seemed amplified, from the crunch of leaves beneath our feet to the faint movement of branches overhead. Even our breathing felt too loud, and beneath it all, that other sound remained. It stayed just far enough away to avoid being seen, but close enough that we could not ignore it. I tried to make sense of it. Animals sometimes follow people, especially out of curiosity. It could have been a deer or something similarly harmless. Even a coyote might behave unpredictably. Though that explanation did not fully convince me, nothing about the movement behind us felt random. It stayed directly behind us, matching our pace with an unsettling precision. The ground began to slope downward into a shallow dip, where the trees grew denser and the light faded more quickly. I paused at the edge, feeling a strong instinct to avoid going any further in that direction. Peyton noticed my hesitation immediately. She looked down into the dip and then back at me, and in that moment, we both understood that something about this was wrong. As soon as we stepped into the dip, the air changed. It became cooler and heavier, carrying the damp smell of earth. The ground softened beneath our feet, each step sinking slightly as if we were walking into a place that did not fully belong to the rest of the forest. Then the sound behind us stopped. It did not fade or gradually disappear. It stopped instantly. That was worse than hearing it. As long as we could hear it, we knew where it was. Now, we had no idea. We kept moving, slower now, listening for any sign of movement. The dip stretched further than it had appeared from above. What seemed shallow at first became more enclosed, with the trees closing in around us, until only small fragments of the sky were visible through the canopy. The light dimmed rapidly, turning everything into muted shades of grey and shadow. Peyton reached for my hand. She was not someone who sought comfort easily, especially in situations like this. The fact that she did it without hesitation told me how afraid she was. Even if she was trying not to show it. We heard movement again, but this time it did not come from behind us. It came from the side. The sound was sudden and unmistakable. Something pushing through the brush at a speed that made it impossible to ignore. Peyton tightened her grip on my hand as I turned toward the sound, trying to catch even a glimpse of whatever was there, but nothing appeared. The trees remained still, and the brush settled back into place as if nothing had disturbed it, but the silence that followed felt different. We began moving again, faster now, no longer trying to hide our urgency. The ground started to rise ahead of us, and the trees thinned just enough to suggest that we might be reaching higher ground. A small sense of hope returned. If we could get a better view, we might be able to orient ourselves and find a way back. We climbed carefully, the loose soil shifting under our feet and branches catching at our arms. The last of the daylight faded quickly behind us, leaving the forest dim and colorless. When we reached the top, I expected to feel relief instead. I felt something else entirely. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, with no sign of the trail we had started on. There were no markers, no clear paths, and nothing that looked familiar. Peyton turned slowly, taking in the view. Her face had gone pale in the fading light. Then she noticed something ahead that I had missed. She stepped forward, her attention fixed on a shape partially hidden by the brush. I followed her gaze and moved closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At first, it was just an indistinct form, something low to the ground. But as we approached, it became clear. It was a backpack. It looked old and worn, with the zipper partially open and the fabric stained and faded. It sat there in a way that felt unnatural, as if it had been left intentionally rather than accidentally. We stopped a few feet away. Neither of us reached for it. People lose things in the woods, but this did not feel like something that had simply been dropped and forgotten. It felt deliberate, like it had been placed there for a reason. The air shifted again, subtle but noticeable. And then we heard it. This time, it was not movement, it was a sound. Low and distant, but unmistakably human. It came from somewhere deeper in the trees ahead of us, just far enough away that we could not understand it, but close enough that there was no doubt. Peyton looked at me, and for the first time since this began, I saw something in her expression that went beyond fear. She understood something I was only beginning to accept. We were not alone. And whatever had been following us was no longer trying to stay hidden. The sound did not come again right away. If it had continued, if it had repeated in a pattern we could track, I might have been able to convince myself it was something explainable. A distant hiker, someone just as lost as we were. But the silence that followed that single, low, human sound felt deliberate. As if whatever had made it knew exactly how much it needed to reveal. Neither of us moved. We stood there with that abandoned backpack sitting between us and the direction the sound had come from, as if it was some kind of boundary we were both unwilling to cross. The air felt still in a way that pressed in on us, and for a moment, I became acutely aware of how far we were from anything familiar. I tried to think logically. If there was another person out there, That could mean help. It could mean a way out, but that thought never fully settled. Because something about the situation did not feel like rescue. Peyton shifted her weight slightly, her grip on my hand tightening for just a moment before she let go. She took a step back instead of forward, her eyes still fixed on the direction of the sound. That was all it took for me to understand that she was thinking the same thing I was. We should not go toward it. Without saying anything, we turned away. From the backpack, that decision felt instinctive, immediate, and heavy with consequence. It was the moment we chose distance over answers. We moved along the ridge instead of descending into the trees ahead. The ground was uneven but more stable than the dip we had climbed out of, and for a short while, the elevation gave us a slightly clearer sense of space. The forest still stretched endlessly in every direction, but at least we could see further between the trees. The light continued to fade as dusk settled in, draining what little color remained from the world around us. The sky above the canopy dimmed to a dull gray before slipping toward darkness, and with it came a cold that had not been there before. It was subtle at first, but it worked its way through my clothes, settling into my skin. We needed to keep moving. Stopping did not feel safe anymore. The sound came again, but this time it was different. It wasn't words or anything I could understand, but unmistakably shaped like speech. A low, uneven murmur that carried just enough structure to confirm it was human, except it did not sound right. There was something off in the rhythm, something unnatural in the way it rose and fell, like someone imitating speech without fully understanding how it worked. Peyton froze. I felt it before I saw it, the way her body went rigid, the way her breathing changed. I followed her gaze, scanning the trees ahead, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. That was when I saw movement. It was distant, partially obscured by the trees, but it was there. A shape, standing still, watching us. I could not make out details. The light was too low, and the distance too great. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that it was not an animal. It was a person, or something close enough to one that the distinction did not matter. We did not run. That might seem strange, but in that moment, running felt like the worst possible decision. The ground was uneven, the visibility was poor, and whatever was out there had already proven it could move through the forest without making a sound when it wanted to. Running would not save us. It would only make us easier to track, so we walked faster than before, but controlled. Every step was careful, every movement calculated. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look back at the shape in the trees, even though I could feel it there. Just at the edge of my awareness, the murmuring sound followed. It did not get any louder or closer, but it stayed with us, threading through the trees in a way that made it impossible to ignore. The ridge began to narrow, forcing us closer to the edge where the ground dropped off into another dense section of forest. The terrain became more difficult, the soil loose and shifting underfoot. Branches reached out at us, catching on our clothes, slowing us down, and then the sound changed again. It stopped mimicking speech, and instead, it did something worse. It matched us, not exactly, not perfectly, but close enough to make my chest tighten. Every time we stepped, there was a delayed echo from somewhere behind and to the side, as if whatever was following us was trying to replicate the rhythm of our movement. And the sound behind us faltered in the same way. We reached a point where the ridge dipped again. Less steep this time, but leading into a darker, thicker section of forest. Staying exposed on the ridge no longer felt like an advantage. The trees closed in around us once more as darkness settled fully. The last traces of daylight disappeared, leaving only a faint gray outline of the world around us. Shapes became harder to distinguish, and every shadow seemed deeper than it should have been. We needed to stop soon. Not because it was safe, but because continuing blindly in the dark would only make things worse. I found a small clearing, barely more than a break in the trees, where the ground was relatively flat. It was not ideal, but it was the best option we had. Peyton did not argue. For a long time, there was nothing. And then, from somewhere just beyond the trees, we heard it again. This time, it said something that sounded almost like a word, but I couldn't understand which one. It hung in the air for a moment before fading into the silence, leaving behind a tension that felt almost unbearable. I realized then that I had been holding my breath, and when I finally exhaled, it sounded too loud in the stillness. Peyton shifted beside me, her shoulder pressing lightly against mine. She had not let go of my arm since we stopped, and I could feel the tension in her grip. I tried to listen past the sound of my own breathing, focusing on anything that might give us information about where it was or what it wanted, but there was nothing. The forest had gone completely still again. Minutes passed, though it was impossible to tell how many. Time felt distorted, stretched out, and uncertain. Every second seemed longer than it should have been, filled with anticipation that never quite resolved. I began to wonder if it had moved on. If whatever had been following us had decided we were no longer worth the effort. That thought lasted only a moment, because then we heard movement. It came from behind us, from the direction we had just come. And it moved quickly through the trees before stopping abruptly at the edge of the clearing. I turned slowly, forcing myself to look. At first, I saw nothing, and then it shifted. A figure stepped just far enough into view that I could see its outline. It stood partially behind a tree, its body angled in a way that seemed almost cautious. The darkness made it difficult to make out details, but there were things I could still recognize. Its posture was off. Slightly tilted, as if it were not entirely comfortable in its own body. Its head was angled toward us, but it did not move the way a person normally would. There was a stiffness to it, a lack of natural motion that made my stomach tighten. Peyton saw it at the same moment I did. Her grip on my arm tightened, but she did not pull away. She did not make a sound, and neither did I. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unbroken. And then, slowly, it moved. It stepped out from behind the tree, its movement uneven but deliberate. And for a brief moment, it was fully visible. That was when I understood what felt wrong. It looked like a person, but not in the way it should have. Its proportions were slightly off, its limbs too long, or held at unnatural angles. Its movements lacked the fluidity of a human body, as if it were mimicking something it had only partially learned. Peyton's breathing hitched slightly, just enough to be heard. The figure reacted instantly. Its head snapped toward her in a way that was too fast. And then it took a step forward. That broke whatever stillness had been holding us in place. I grabbed Peyton's hand and pulled her back, moving quickly away from the clearing and into the trees. We did not run blindly, but we moved as fast as we could manage in the darkness, pushing through branches and uneven ground without stopping. Behind us, we heard it move. Not in the same careful, measured way as before. This time, it followed. The sound of its movement was wrong. It was faster than it should have been, its steps uneven but rapid, crashing through the brush in a way that made it impossible to track precisely. We pushed forward, trying to put as much distance between us and it as possible. The forest seemed to close in around us, the darkness thickening, the ground becoming more difficult with every step. I could feel Peyton struggling to keep pace, but she did not slow down. Neither of us dared to look back. The sounds behind us grew louder as it got closer, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We kept moving for several more seconds, before finally slowing, both of us breathing hard, listening for any sign that it was still there. But the forest had gone silent again. It had not stopped because it lost us. It had stopped because it chose. 2. We did not speak after that. There was nothing to say that would not make it more real, and nothing either of us could offer that would make it better. The silence between us was no longer peaceful, or even tense in the usual sense. It felt necessary, like any sound we made would draw attention in a way we could not afford. We stood there in the dark, listening. At first, there was nothing. Number? Movement? No sound, no indication that anything was nearby. It would have been easy, in another moment, to believe that we had imagined it, or that whatever had followed us had finally gone. Peyton shifted slightly beside me, her hands still gripping mine. I could feel the tremor in her fingers now. She had been holding herself together for hours, and I knew that kind of control did not last forever. We could not stay where we were. Standing still in the dark, waiting for something we could not see, was not a strategy. It was surrender. But moving blindly through unfamiliar terrain carried its own risks, especially now that we knew we were not alone. I needed to make a decision. Not a perfect one, just one that kept us moving. I leaned closer to Peyton and guided her forward, choosing a direction that angled slightly downhill. It was not based on certainty, only instinct. Water tended to collect in lower areas, and where there was water, there was often some sign of human presence. Even if it was distant, we moved slowly, feeling our way through the darkness. Every step was deliberate. Every shift in the ground was tested before committing weight. The forest had become something entirely different at night. It was no longer a place you could navigate by sight. It was a place you felt your way through, piece by piece. For a long time, the only sound was our movement. Then, gradually, something else emerged. At first, it was so faint that I questioned whether it was real. A soft, uneven rhythm. Breathing, not ours. It was behind us again, closer than it had ever been before. Peyton heard it too. I felt it in the way her hand tightened around mine, and the way her steps faltered for just a fraction of a second before. She forced herself to keep going. I did not turn around. I knew, instinctively, that seeing it now would not help us. The thing behind us did not try to hide anymore. It did not match our pace, or mimic our movements. It simply stayed there, just behind us, close enough that I could feel it as much as hear it. The ground sloped more steeply now, the soil damp beneath our feet. That was the first sign that we were moving toward something different. The air felt cooler and heavier with moisture. Somewhere ahead, I thought I heard the faint sound of water. We moved faster, no longer trying to be silent. Behind us, the breathing changed. It grew sharper, more uneven, as if whatever was following us was reacting to the shift in our pace. Then, the sound of it surged forward, crashing through the brush with a speed that broke whatever fragile control we had been. Holding on to Dot this time, we ran. There was no calculation, just movement. Branches tore at us as we pushed through the trees, the uneven ground threatening to trip us with every step. Peyton stumbled once, and I pulled her upright, without slowing, refusing to let either of us fall. The sound behind us closed the distance. I could hear the uneven rhythm of its movement clearly now. It was gaining on us. The sound of water grew louder as we broke through a line of trees and nearly stumbled straight into it. A narrow creek cut through the forest, its surface reflecting what little light remained in the sky. It was not deep, but it was wide enough to disrupt our path. I did not hesitate. I pulled Peyton straight into the water. The the cold hit instantly, but we pushed through, moving downstream instead of across. The current was weak, but the uneven rocks beneath the surface made every step unstable. Behind us, the sound reached the edge of the creek, and then it stopped. I did not turn around immediately. We kept moving through the water, putting distance between us and the bank, before finally slowing enough for me to look back. At first, I saw nothing. Then, slowly, it emerged. It stood at the edge of the creek, just beyond the reach of the water. The shape was wrong in all the ways I had noticed before, but clearer now. Its limbs were too long, its posture uneven, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It looked like a person that had been assembled from memory rather than reality. Peyton pulled slightly at my arm, drawing my attention forward again. The creek curved ahead, and beyond it, through the trees, I saw something that did not belong. Shape with straight lines. A break in the natural pattern of the forest. We moved toward it, slower now, cautious, but driven by something stronger than fear. As we got closer, the shape became clearer. A small, weathered structure. A ranger station, or what used to be one. The building was old, its wood darkened and worn by time. One of the windows was broken, and the door hung slightly open. It looked abandoned, but it was something solid, something real, in a place that had become anything but. We stepped out of the creek and approached it carefully. Behind us, the forest remained silent. We reached the door and stepped inside. The air within was stale, but still, the walls closing around us in a way that felt both confining and protective. There was nothing inside but remnants of what had once been there, broken furniture, scattered debris, signs of long neglect. But it was sheltered. We stayed there for the rest of the night. Neither of us slept. When morning finally came, it did so slowly. The light filtering in through the broken window and revealing the world in fragments. The forest looked different in daylight. We stepped outside cautiously. The creek flowed as it had before, unchanged. We followed it downstream, and within an hour, we found a trail. By midday, we reached the trailhead. The parking lot was no longer empty. People were there preparing for their hike. It felt distant. Like something we were stepping back into rather than returning to. I looked toward the edge of the forest one. Last time, before we left, there was nothing there. No shape. No shape, no sign that anything had ever been watching us. But I knew better. We had not found our way out. We had been let go. And whatever had been out there, waiting in the dark, had decided. That was enough.